Imagine being born into a world where your very existence was a complication. In 1955, a young woman named Joanne Schiebel gave birth to a baby boy in San Francisco. But there was no celebration. Because of social pressures and family disapproval, she decided to give him up for adoption. She had one dream for this child, that he would be raised by college-educated parents. But life had a different plan. The lawyer's family she chose backed out at the last minute because they wanted a girl. Instead, the baby was handed over to Paul and Clara Jobs. Paul was a high school dropout and a mechanic. Clara had never finished college. Joanne initially refused to sign the adoption papers. She only relented when the couple promised they would eventually send the boy to college. This boy was Steve Jobs. Steve grew up with the haunting knowledge that he was abandoned. While his parents loved him deeply, that feeling of being an outsider shaped his entire soul. He was a lonely child, often bored at school. He found more comfort in his father's garage, watching how machines worked. His parents sacrificed every penny they had to keep their promise of sending him to college. They sent him to Reed College, one of the most expensive schools at the time. But Steve felt the weight of that sacrifice. Within 6 months, he looked at his parents' life savings disappearing into his tuition, and he felt a deep sense of guilt. He didn't see the value in the education he was receiving, so he did the unthinkable. He dropped out. But dropping out wasn't the end of his struggle. It was the beginning of his hunger. With no dorm room, he slept on the cold floors of his friends' rooms. He had no money for food. He walked miles across town every Sunday night to the Hare Krishna temple just to get one good meal a week. He collected empty Coke bottles, returning them for a 5-cent deposit just to buy a burger. He was a nomad in his own life. Yet, in that period of starvation, he followed his curiosity. He sat in on a calligraphy class that seemed useless at the time. He learned about serif and sans-serif typefaces. He learned about what makes great typography great. He didn't know it then, but 10 years later, that knowledge would become the reason why every computer you use today has beautiful fonts. Steve's life shows us that even when you are rejected by your parents, abandoned by the system, and starving on the streets, your curiosity is a compass that will eventually lead you to greatness. Most people wait for the perfect opportunity, the perfect office, the perfect budget. But Steve Jobs, he started with a garage and a friend who was even more of an outcast than he was. In 1976, Steve Jobs was 21 and Steve Wozniak was 26. They were two long-haired dropouts with a dream that sounded like science fiction. They wanted to put a computer in the home of every ordinary person. At that time, computers were the size of refrigerators. They cost as much as a house. No one believed in them. To raise the money to start their company, Jobs sold his only mode of transportation, his Volkswagen bus, and Wozniak sold his HP scientific calculator. They gathered a total of $1,300. They worked out of Jobs' parents' garage, breathing in solder smoke, surrounded by wires. They had no employees, no furniture, and no investors. But Jobs had a vision that surpassed his lack of resources. He wasn't the engineer. He was the architect of the experience. He pushed Wozniak to make the machine smaller, faster, and more beautiful. When they finished the Apple I, Jobs didn't wait for people to call him. He went to local electronic stores, often barefoot, demanding that they take his product. He was a master of the hustle. By the time they released the Apple II, they had sparked a revolution. The world began to see that these two kids from a garage were onto something massive. By age 23, Steve Jobs was worth $1 million. By age 25, he was worth over $100 million. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He became the face of the new digital age. But what people didn't see was the intensity, the sleepless nights, and the sheer refusal to accept the word Impossible. He proved that you don't need a PhD or a massive bank account to change the world. You only need a vision and the willingness to sell everything you own to make it happen. Success is a dangerous thing. It can make you feel invincible, but it can also make you a target. In 1985, at the age of 30, Steve Jobs faced a nightmare that almost destroyed him. He had hired John Sculley, a professional executive from Pepsi, to help him run Apple. Jobs had famously asked him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" But within a year, their relationship soured. The board of directors sided with Sculley. In a move that shocked the world, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the very company he had started in his parents' garage. Imagine the pain. The company was his child, his identity, his life's work. To be kicked out so publicly was a humiliation few could survive. He was wealthy, but he felt like a total failure. For months, he didn't know what to do. He even thought about running away from Silicon Valley. He felt like he had dropped the baton while it was being passed to him. He was a fallen king. But then, something remarkable happened. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. He realized he still loved what he did. He decided to start over. He founded a new company called Next, and he bought a small graphics company called Pixar. For the next decade, while Apple was slowly failing, heading toward bankruptcy without him, Steve was quietly revolutionizing another industry. He helped create Toy Story, the world's first computer-animated film. He was building his comeback. In the shadows, he learned that being fired was the bitter medicine he needed to clear his mind and regain his creative edge. His life teaches us that sometimes you have to be destroyed to be rebuilt into something even stronger. By 1996, Apple was dying. It was 90 days away from being completely broke. In a desperate move, they bought Steve Jobs' company, Next, and brought him back as an advisor. The man they had exiled 12 years ago was now their only hope. When he walked back into the halls of Apple, he found a company that had lost its soul. They were making hundreds of mediocre products. Jobs' first move was brutal and legendary. He called a meeting and told the managers, "The products you are making are crap." He cut 70% of Apple's projects. He fired thousands of people. He was on a mission to save the company, and he had no time for politeness. He told his team, "Focus is not about saying yes. It's about saying no to 1,000 things." He took a salary of only $1 a year. He wasn't there for the money. He was there for the revolution. Then, the miracles started happening. He launched the iMac, which made computers look like art. He launched the iPod, which changed how we listen to music forever. But the world truly changed in 2007. Steve stood on a stage, looking thinner and older, but with a fire in his eyes that was brighter than ever. He introduced the iPhone. He didn't just build a phone. He put the entire world in our pockets. He turned a failing company into the most valuable corporation on the planet. This wasn't just a business success. It was the greatest comeback in the history of mankind. It reminds us that no matter how far you fall, or how many people count you out, if you have the courage to start again, you can reclaim your throne, and more. In 2003, at the height of his power, Steve Jobs was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. The man who had spent his life controlling every detail of his products now faced something he could not control. For years, he fought the disease in private, continuing to work with a ferocious intensity. He knew his clock was ticking. This awareness of death, it didn't make him sad. It made him fearless. He used death as a tool to cut through the noise of life. In 2005, he gave a famous speech at Stanford University. He told the students, Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. He urged them to follow their hearts and intuition, because everything else is secondary. He worked until his final days, obsessing over the design of the iPad. Even when he was too weak to stand, he wanted to leave behind a legacy that would last for 100 years. When Steve Jobs passed away on October 5th, 2011, the world stopped. People who had never met him felt like they had lost a friend. They left apples and flowers at Apple stores across the globe. He was a man who was difficult, sometimes cold, often demanding, but he was a man who thinked different. He proved that one person, despite being an unwanted baby, a college dropout, and a failed CEO, could move the needle of human history. His story is a message to every dreamer. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. You have the power to dent the universe.